Okay. Well, welcome to the first session of day 2 outside of the keynote. I hope you all enjoyed the keynote and saw all of the exciting things we've been announcing this week around Office development. This session today is intended to go that next level deeper on each of those 3 pillars. So we're going to do 20 minutes on each of these pillars to explain in a bit more detail some of the other things that Chi and Yina in the keynote couldn't get around to showing. And then the intention of that is hopefully that we'll tease you and tempt you to go to the subsequent sessions which run through today in this building on each of those 3 pillars that go to the next level down of essentially coding for the majority of the session. So the idea here is to kind of take all that excitement you had from the keynote and excite you even more around Office specifically, and then we'll go a lot deeper. My name is Jeremy Thake. I work in the technical product marketing team with inside Microsoft focused on Office platform development.
I'm Tristan Davis, program manager in the Office Extensibility team, who's responsible for all the great stuff you saw this morning and everything we're going to show you this afternoon.
And so you saw this slide during the keynote. Essentially, what this is talking about is those 3 pillars. Now, if you've been following along with where we've been on this journey around Office platform development, you would have seen in the past we talked about 2 pillars, which was users and data. So the users aspect was about essentially making your solution a part of Office apps. So that's about building inside Outlook, Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. And we've got some exciting news there and some other Office clients as well today. And then the Microsoft Graph, the data aspect, is what we're talking about when we say about building intelligent apps by connecting to Office services. And you saw Yina do some great demos in the keynote this morning around that Microsoft Graph. The additional pillar we've added with this announcement at Build is around engaging users through conversations. And you'll see in a lot more detail, there was a demonstration in the keynote around the Zendesk scenario with Office Group connectors. We'll show a few more of those connectors today. And we'll actually talk a bit more about the Skype integrations as well. So that 3rd pillar is the newly introduced one as of this Build conference. Now, from an opportunities perspective, again, you would have seen this slide, so we're not going to dwell too much on it. But what is amazing is kind of all of you guys right now have Office in your pocket, whether you're on a mobile phone, whether you've got your laptop out, you're working on your emails as you're 50% listening to us and 50% trying to keep up with work. I jest, you guys go do what you got to do. We've been doing the same thing as well. But the essence is that as an Office user, as a developer, as a web skills, whether it's HTML and JavaScript, whether it's .NET, whether it's Java, whether it's Ruby, whether it's Python, you can start building and extending our experiences inside Office. And I think this is where it's really exciting. We've kind of really transitioned from where you had to have a specific kind of .NET framework build and you're writing in COM or VBA and it only worked on a Windows 32 versions of Office to now this kind of a notion that as long as you're building HTML and JavaScript and you have that manifest file that Yina showed in the keynote, you're good to go, not only in the Win32 version of Office, but across all of the different Office clients that are out there. And then with a Microsoft Graph, rather than having this traditional aspect of I have a different SDK when I'm calling Exchange, and a different SDK when I'm calling Planner, and a different SDK when I'm calling these other services that are living in there, I have one endpoint to rule them all. I essentially have a standardized OData 4 approach to getting all that data back. And so it's really easy once you've connected to the graph once with one service to then get it with other services as well. And so this notion of being able to get all that user data that you in the room are doing, your organization's doing, your customers are doing, and integrate that into your own applications is really exciting. And I think hopefully by the end of this session today, you'll be even more excited based on some of the demos we're showing with some of the new capabilities we're introducing in all 3 of these pillars. So to get straight into it, what we're actually going to do is jump into Office add-ins. Now, Yina did show the manifest file in the keynote. Essentially, that manifest file is XML, which the Office client reads. And that is kind of the instruction set of explaining what that Office add-in is, where it can be hosted. Can it be hosted in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook? And then what the key pointer there is it points to an HTML that's being sourced somewhere on a web server. So gone are the days where as a COM add-in, you are running in the same execution process of Outlook. I've often called Outlook not responding, because the more add-ins you added as COM add-ins into Outlook, it would kind of drag it to its knees. With this notion of add-ins now, the execution process of your add-in, your task pane, whether it's the Starbucks task pane or some of the ones we'll show today, will essentially minimize the processing that's going on the actual Outlook host because you're executing outside of that box. So Tristan, from a platform perspective with Office add-ins, how can you build these with the HTML and JavaScript? We've got a few options, right?
Yeah, so Like Jeremy said, one of the core tenets of what we did here with Office add-ins is that it's web-based, right? We didn't want you to have to feel like you had to go learn Office to build an add-in. We want every single one of you who say, I'm a web developer, cool. Office is just another SDK, it's another JavaScript library I can pull off the shelf, and I can go use all the web tools and tricks I already know and go build really awesome, deeply integrated solutions inside of the Office apps. So you'll be able to do that whether it's in Visual Studio, where we've got a bunch of great templates and starter projects to get you going, or if you don't want to use Office at all, Visual Studio at all, you can go use the Yeoman generator to scaffold out an Office add-in project and then use whatever web dev tools you're used to, and you can get an add-in project going pretty darn quick.
Right, and so one of the things as part of each of these sections, we'll promote some of the hands-on labs that you can go and do in the coding challenging section in the expo hall. And we've had some great attendees go through it already. They've been really impressed with how quickly you can get going on building these things, and we'll list those at the end of each of these sections.
Absolutely.
So what you're seeing on the screen here is Excel, and this is a code sample that we're shipping on dev.office.com. We like to be able to present things to you guys that you can immediately go away and break apart and check how we built these things out. So all these things will be published on GitHub. You can go and pull them down. In some cases, we actually have some great people that will actually add additional things. So they'll go and submit a pull request to add additional features onto these code samples too. And it's been really great working with the community to improve what we think was a cool demo to build and add additional things onto it. Now, this demo was built by a bunch of guys in a room, and so big thank you for putting this together. And what you'll notice is we now have this new ribbon group capability with the add-in commands inside of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. Now, we had this in Outlook originally, and we announced that at the Connect event back in October-November timeframes. But now we have that same capability across of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. So what this means is that essentially I now can have as many buttons as I like across each of these tabs, or I can create my own tab to do certain actions. Now, the nice thing is with these actions is if I click on this one here to import my transactions, what that's doing under the covers is taking some simulated JSON response data from a bank of all the transactions that have happened from my bank account in my personal world. Now, this is fictitious data. I am not spending $2 in a restaurant cafe. That's a made-up number. But essentially what it's doing is showing that now I've got all of that data in Excel that I can manipulate. Now, that transaction sheet was completely built and written using JavaScript code. The chart was added and bound to the table of that data using that JavaScript code. And so we've really come a long way in the advances in the Excel JavaScript APIs and the capabilities of what you can do in an automated way via this Office JavaScript capability. Now, I can also do things like create dashboards. And what the dashboards will do, well, actually, again, you'll see, notice, it's creating new sheets. And again, we've got bound data from the tables, and we're creating a bunch of charts that allows me to do kind of all that stuff that I would want to do around a banking scenario of analyzing my spends. So you imagine that with your own data within your business, where you're pulling data from a remote source, and you want to build these dashboards, but you want all the capabilities you get within inside of Excel. So for instance, when I go back to my transactions here, I can do things like with the filtering, I can say, only show me the transactions year to date. And that under the covers is, again, changing the chart because it adheres to the fact that I've changed the filter on the dates here. You can see that that filter is now saying that it's filtering year to date what's going through. And then, therefore, all of the rest of the charts and stuff that have been filtered by that table essentially are going to be updated and modified too. And so we've done all these things based on it being available in the JavaScript ribbon up the top. So for instance, if I went here and said I've got this research capability thing, and I want to make sure that this gets tracked in my taxes from a donation perspective, when I click that button, you'll notice straight away that it's jumped me over to this donation sheet, and it's added that line item there. And what that's doing then is essentially summarizing up my donations by organizations and tracking how much donations I'm doing during the week. Now, all of this, if I flick back to my code sample here, you'll see we've got this one functions file where everything's happening. And if I just quickly go to this add donations aspect here, I've clicked the wrong one. If I just click on the worksheet one here, essentially in the JavaScript code, you'll just see this is normal web JavaScript kind of executions. And we've just got this really nice way of saying that, for instance, on that first sheet that got created, I want to be able to protect it so it can't be edited. So this is something you could hand to an accountant, hand to a financial person within the organization with the intent that you want to protect cells. And this is a new feature inside of the Excel APIs that we're announcing today. Now, in addition to that, you'll start to see things like the ability to auto-fit columns and auto-fit rows. This is something that when we first released Excel, and people were trying to inject this data in a nice visual way inside of Excel, that they had that capability. And this is, again, something that we're announcing now with Excel APIs like that. So again, this add-in will be available on dev.office.com/code samples. So you can kind of go in and dig into all those things that is happening and how it's writing out all those tables and those JavaScript columns and so forth in an automated way through the ribbon.
And one of the things you're going to see, and you can kind of see this in all the stuff Jeremy's talking about, is the depth of JavaScript APIs and capabilities is just going to keep growing. So when we released Excel 2016, we had what we call our v1.1 API set. We'll continue to add to that. So these are new APIs that are showing up in our v1.2 API set. And then as Office 365 and its regular deployment cadence comes out, that capability set will grow, and you'll be able to take advantage of deeper and deeper functionality inside of the Office applications within your add-ins, which I think is awesome.
So this add-in is probably my favorite add-in, not because it's the legal team that use it, but just in terms of the concept of what this allows the legal team at Microsoft to do. This was a paid gig. The legal team wanted an ability to be able to construct documents on the fly based on, for developers like yourselves, it's the equivalent of us having code snippets. This is like legal snippets called the clause library. And if my internet's playing nice, essentially on the right-hand side, what it allows me to do is authenticate in that task pane to my SharePoint environment and grab from a SharePoint list, all of the clauses, aka code snippets, and then render them in my task pane. And then I have the ability here to essentially go down on the right-hand side and look through my snippets, and I can just go and add them to my document as I choose. So I can build these horrible legal documents that no one uses and no one ever reads and just signs their lives away. I've just recently bought a house and done exactly the same thing. Hasn't come back to bite me just yet. But you can see here that it's very easy for those legal people to go and build and construct documents based on pre-canned snippets that the legal team have approved in the SharePoint lists and libraries. What this demonstrates is the ability for a Word add-in, Excel, or Outlook, or any of the Office clients to have an authentication piece to it. Now, in this case, we're going to the SharePoint APIs, but you could go and look and hoop into the calendar APIs in a Microsoft Graph. You could go over to, like we've demonstrated in the past at conferences, hoop into something like Salesforce and get customer data out of Salesforce. And when you're building your Word documents, be able to get that latest real-time data straight from Salesforce. The way I candidly talk about this when we're working with partners is anywhere you see a user copying and pasting from another application and then jumping back into Outlook or jumping back into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, there's an opportunity there for you to build an add-in that saves that copy and paste or saves that risk of not having the latest system information and making it one-click button like you saw in Excel. Now, this add-in is actually shipped, again, open sourced back in November. But one of the things we've added to this, obviously, is this notion of ribbon buttons. So me and Tristan were like, well, what can we do to improve this solution? And so what we did was, if I close this down, is just to show you how simple this is. This is the current manifest file inside of Visual Studio. Word just wants to restart itself. It's self-fighting, self-healing, as was mentioned in the keynote today. Essentially, it's just pointing off to where you're going to launch in our case, it's actually an ASP.NET MVC server stack with an Angular spire on top. And so we're launching this MVC application, and that's what shows up on the homepage in the task pane. But what I've got just sneakily grabbed in my notepad here, and I'll walk through it once I've pasted it in, is this is how you're going to handle adding commands, and they'll go through this in a lot more detail in the session later on this afternoon, of how you get that button added into your application. So you can see here that I want this to be a host type of Word document, and that it's in the desktop form factor in its purposes as demo. I'm going to put it in the Insert tab here. So you can see here we've got the Insert tab, so forth. I'm going to give a group, so I'm going to have a group pane within that ribbon. And then basically you point to a bunch of icons you want to show, and then what the buttons will do. Now there's all these resource IDs that get referenced in these values, and if I scroll down to the bottom here, we actually define those resources. So that's where we define all the images for the various buttons we're going to show, and then this is the value of what's going to be shown on the buttons and where what that's going to do when you launch it. i.e., we're going to launch the welcome page when I click on the just insert a clause, and then we're going to do one where we're actually going to add a clause. And so what you'll see here is when I click start, inside of Visual Studio, now that will deploy that manifest on the fly for me. And you notice that my task pane didn't automatically show up. Because now in the Insert tab, and there is a little bit of a delay on the build I've got right now, but essentially what will happen is these ribbons will show up on the right-hand side. And by delay, it's almost like an awkward silence on stage as you wait. There you go. And so what you do there is now, what this means is, as an end user, you can make your add-ins more discoverable because you can create those Woodgroove Bank groups, or you can create those, in this case, clause library groups, and it's going to go and log in again to that answer. And the nice part about this is, from a legal workflow perspective, if I already have a new paragraph I want to get added to that SharePoint library, so anyone that uses this add-in can see it, I could say this is a very important clause to be in all documents, and select it. I have the ability here that I can click New Clause, and then essentially that would come up with my new form, and I'll be able to save that directly back into SharePoint. So again, we're given the ability to have these ribbon buttons there that allows me then to capture that information and store it back into a service as well from the content as OpenXML back into my document. Now, one of the big questions we always get, Tristan, is as an administrator, an IT pro, how do I get this to all of my users? What if I wanted to get everyone, imagine everyone in this audience is in our organization, and we want to push this clause library out to them. How will we do that?
Yeah, so let's build on top of the manifest that Jeremy just showed us. So I've gone and I've taken his manifest, and I've made a couple tweaks to it. I said, oh, actually, that button should be on the References tab, and maybe I changed the iconography a little bit. And then I said, I've deployed COM add-ins in the past, and I've lived through the pain of having to create that MSI and use something like System Center to deploy it out to 10,000 desktops, and it was great until I had to patch it. And then patching it becomes this pain. I'm sure many of you out there, if I asked for a show of hands, could tell me you've lived through a little bit of pain of trying to deploy and keep updated some COM add-in to some huge number of users inside your organization. So one of the beauties of the web add-in model is that as Jeremy showed you, all the code that backed that add-in was up on the server, right? So the first benefit you have is when you go and you make fixes to that web app, that's immediately available to everyone that's using it. There's no footprint on the client that needs to get deployed. But what about getting it there in the first place? One of the things we're really excited to announce that will come out in preview in the next week is a solution to O365 deployment of add-ins that's going to make that super easy. So let's show you how that's going to work. So I'm going to start by, I'm Shirley Brown. I happen to be one of the folks in the sales department at Tailspin Toys who needs to use that clause library add-in. So I'm going to start by going into airplane mode really quick and just showing you that today, here's Shirley in Word. She's got no add-ins on her ribbon, right? If I go to this References tab, you'll see that she doesn't have my clause library add-in. She's sad. It's hard for her to get started. She wishes she had some really cool tool like what we've built. So let's get it onto her desktop and see what she has to do to make that happen. I'm going to turn my wireless back on, get off the airplane. And now that my wireless is enabled, what we're going to do is I'm going to go be the administrator of Tailspin Toys who wants to deploy that add-in to Sally and all the other folks in the sales department. So let's open up the O365 admin portal and log in. Oh, and correctly type the password and log in. And right there next to all the other stuff you've been able to do inside the admin portal, what you're going to find is a brand new add-in deployment experience. Let's get that guy to come up. And from that admin experience, I'm going to be able to do some really, really cool stuff that lets me get these add-ins to the right folks inside my enterprise. So I'm going to scroll down here to Settings. You'll see this Services and Add-ins tab. And right there in the same place that today you manage things like Sway and the Office 365 store and our built-in experiences, you're going to be able to deploy and manage your add-ins as well. So let's go make Sally really happy and get her that clause library add-in. I'm going to click Add in Office Add-in. I'm going to say, ooh, that manifest file Jeremy had, okay, that's the one I want to deploy. So I'll say, I have the manifest file on my device. I'll go in to the location where I kept that project. And here's the manifest. And then I'm going to say next. And what you'll see is we've parsed the contents of that manifest. We can show the icon. We can say, hey, that's a Word add-in provided by Microsoft in this case, and here are the permissions that it's going to need in order to deploy for those users. Great. I trust this add-in. I feel pretty good about those capabilities, so I'm going to go assign it to some users. And now what I can actually do is leverage the power of all the stuff you've seen us do in Office 365 to not to deploy it to Sally specifically, but I'm going to deploy it to all the folks who are in the sales department Outlook group. So anyone who happens to be in that group, whenever they join, if they've already joined or they join in 3 weeks, they should have access to the Clause Library add-in. So I'm going to click Save. I'm going to save again. And now what we're doing in the background is we're taking the fact that I want to entitle that specific users in that Outlook group, we're adding that to Azure AD so that every time a user logs into Office, we know the add-ins they should have access to, and we're taking that manifest that Jeremy and I created and we're storing it up in Office 365 as well so that we can stream that down to the user's desktop automatically. So you can see, great, manifest file saved from my organization. Now I'm done. That's all I had to do as the IT pro or the guy managing our Office 365 deployment. And let's go log in as Shirley again and see her experience. Next morning, Shirley shows up at work. She goes to create a new document. And what's going to happen is right there in the background, so she starts working, on important stuff. Oh, wait. I don't know if you noticed, but up here, there's a new tab. So a different add-in that I had already deployed showed up on Shirley's machine. What about that Clause Library add-in? If I go to the References tab, there it is automatically. So there was nothing that Shirley had to do, no trust prompts, nothing. Just as a part of being signed into Office, all the right add-ins are showing up automatically on her desktop. And if later she decided she didn't want to work in the sales department and she left that Outlook group, those add-ins would disappear automatically as well. So it really illustrates the awesome power that you'll have to get your add-ins deployed within the enterprise. Automatically, no client footprint, updatability is controlled completely from the server. The world has become great. No more worrying about MSI deployments and patching and how I'm going to get that fixed to 10,000 users. So we're really excited to share that with you guys.
So that was probably my favorite thing, because it is one thing that we know that we get a lot of customers, we get a lot of partners go, look, we've managed to convince this customer to go buy our add-in, but we're finding it really hard to get it deployed. And so that's going to be really a big thing for you guys, both internally and as partners, to kind of get these add-ins out to the people and get them exposed in that ribbon and make sure they're aware. Now, my favorite announcement of the whole week, in all honesty, is the OneNote add-ins. So we've talked a lot about Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Outlook from an Office client perspective. Today we're announcing in preview that in OneNote Online, you'll now be able to use the same Office add-in type structure of a manifest plus website with HTML and JavaScript, and actually run that inside of OneNote Online. And that'll be coming out to tenants very shortly after, I believe, like by the end of April. So we're actually demoing this internally, and you're going to
I'm already on.
Oh, you're
so
done? Sweet.
Here I am in my internal pre-production OneDrive, and I want to show you a little bit about the cool stuff we're doing with OneNote add-ins as well. So I happened to create a notebook about Build 2016, so let's open that guy up. And what you'll see is inside of OneNote Online, just as we've done with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint Online, if I jump to the Insert tab, Office add-ins are available. So I've got an add-in locally that I'm going to deploy. So you'll see a little bit more about this afternoon, but I'm going to use some of the new side-loading capability. So you as developers will be able to just point at a manifest inside of any of the online apps, side-load that add-in and test it without having to deploy it or anything, just for your own development capability. So let's go and do that. I happen to have a pre-production version of the Skimit add-in that we'll be releasing for OneNote Online, so I'm going to get that uploaded. And what you'll see is it's, again, just like we did in Word earlier with the Clause Library, Skimit can extend the ribbon, so they've added a Skimit tab and a Skimit button. I'll go click the Skimit add-in, and here they are, right inside of OneNote, which is super cool all by itself. And I can click Get Started, and then I can go, maybe this build.microsoft.com link is interesting. Let's see if they can give me a Skimit for that. So they'll go fetch the skim based on that link. Here it is, and I can click Insert. And rather than having that link, now I've got an automatically summarized version of what's on that web page provided by Skimit. So you can imagine all the kind of amazing stuff you're going to be able to build inside of OneNote Online using this capability. We're really, really excited to add add-ins to more and more of the Office products and let you leverage that same JavaScript power and that same ribbon extensibility to just create native feeling experiences everywhere that the user's using Office. So
cool. And then so that was pretty exciting as well.
Yeah.
And then how about for the Mac? We've
Thank
got
you,
some
the guy
stuff we want to show over here.
Yes, and thank you to the guy that clapped. This stuff is super cool. So
There was one at OneNote. Oh, I think it might have been
someone
Gareth
was
as
really
well.
excited, and I appreciate that. I think this stuff's awesome. So let's jump over to Mac. So You saw Yina this morning in the keynote. She showed the Office at Work add-in. So the Office at Work is an amazing partner, and Yina described how they've built a data-driven document solution. What did I want to show you? I'm just going to give you a little taste of it because Yina gave you a really awesome version of how it works, is that same add-in that they built for the Win32 app that works on the iPad will work on the Mac as well. So starting with the update for Office for Mac 2016 coming in about a month, you'll be able to run all of your existing add-ins across the PC, the Mac, the browser, and the iPad with one set of JavaScript code and one set of capabilities. So here I am in Martin's Document Designer add-in. I can do all the same things that I did before. I can go say, hey, this is my business letter. I can go and connect to data and backend sources. It uses Microsoft Graph to pull data from SharePoint Online. It has sample data. It's a super powerful tool. And just like I can do in the client, I can use things like content controls and binding to go and pull data from those online sources and insert them in appropriate places in the document. So we're really, really excited about this capability, and it really speaks to our goal with add-ins, which is a single source of truth, right? You're writing JavaScript and HTML, and then Office is making sure that JavaScript and HTML works in the appropriate ways in all the places the Office user wants to use that software, whether it's on the PC, on the Mac, on the browser, et cetera. So really, really exciting stuff.
So it's great to see this roadmap grow with the additional line item of OneNote there, and obviously progressing from left to right. You can see this progress of rather than waiting 3 years to announce things all baked, you're seeing us over time incrementally improve and reach out to other Office clients. So essentially just to kind of sum up this particular pillar, these are some of the things we've announced that are totally new, and what's available now is genuinely available that was announced in previous events. So the big ones new in preview is definitely the IT deployment of Office add-ins and the OneNote add-ins and all the additional stuff we added in the Word APIs from a 1.3 perspective that is going to be shown in a lot more detail in the sessions later on this afternoon. Again, it's hard to do this justice in a 20-minute segment.
The one thing I'll call out really quick, because it's one of my personal loves, is I'd encourage all of you to go to dev.office.com. You'll see our documentation is there. But more importantly, all of that documentation is actually sourced on GitHub. We author our specs in the open. You can go and look at not just what's shipped, but what the team's building and designing for the next round of awesome APIs. You can comment on it. You can make issues. You can suggest ways to improve the documentation. It's really a two-way conversation we're having on GitHub, and we'd love to have all of you participating in that as well.
So the session that will go into a lot more detail around this is B866. And I'd highly encourage you to go there because it will go into a lot more detail about some of the other stuff that you've seen in the keynote, in our session, and some of the hands-on labs that we're doing as well. And then the coding challenges, we have essentially 5 there that you can go and sit and do. And there's some special ones for the Mac. So if you're a Mac guy and you want to use the Yeoman generator rather than Visual Studio on an OS X or an Ubuntu device, it doesn't matter what you've got there. You can go and build Office add-ins in those ways as well. And we actually have a really good lab on how you can test those Office add-ins if you host them on iPad too. So moving to the next pillar, which is the Microsoft Graph, all about connecting to our services. You saw a lot of this in the keynote and got a lot of rounds of applause from the demos that Yina did, just to kind of really highlight the power of what's going on inside that Microsoft Graph and the rich data sets that you can get at inside of Office 365. And there's been some great additions to this, and some of the things we'll show today will highlight this. Now, well, the first one that we want to do is just jump over to the Surface device, which is that one. And I'm just going to go over to this project here, and I need to restart it. When I go into this one, remember we built that Excel spreadsheet with the transactions, and we had that tax kind of notification that we put that donation in there. Well, essentially with Edge now, I have the ability that I can launch this ASP.NET MVC application, and what that's going to do is connect through to my OneDrive for Business, and it's going to read the Excel file specific sheet where I had those donations directly into my ASP.NET MVC application using our new Excel REST APIs. So what this means is if I go over to my OneDrive and have a look at that Woodgrove Bank workbook, and we've added a few more donations rather than what I'd injected directly into the sheet when I did my demo in the previous section, as you can see here, we've got all these Trade Research and Prosware Inc. and the Human Fund, and they're just being written as table data in here. Now, in a scenario where it's effectively you might not want the user to add the declaration that there was a donation that they found through their list of transactions like we showed in the ribbon button. You might actually want to do that programmatically as a REST call from an external service. So we might be with my bank, I might have done a donation like we can do internally at Microsoft through our Give campaign, and we'll have an Excel REST call that just goes and pushes and updates this sheet remotely without having to open the sheet and do anything with it. So you can see I have the sheet open here. If I go back over here and just click Add New within my MVC application, I'm going to pick a date, and I'm just going to type an amount, and we'll just say that we're very generous, way more generous than the Starbucks token, and we're going to give that to...
That's why you're so generous.
Yeah, that's right, see.
That makes sense.
And what you'll see on the background is that's going to go and post and update the sheet. Now, while it's doing that, I'm just going to jump into this code. Now, it's as simple as, when I say the create donation here, is we're going to go to just conscious of the size. We're going to go to the graph, and essentially we're going to go and get all those OneDrive files, and we're going to, in the purpose of this demo, we're finding that Excel spreadsheet. And then it's as simple as creating this array of the donation amount, the donation date, and the organization, and then wrapping that in a request body helper. And then all we're doing is we're serializing that request, and we're posting that essentially to the HTTP endpoint that's available in the Excel REST APIs. And then we'll actually get a response back that allows me then to update what's going on. So you'll see here now that this table has responded, but then if I go over to my Excel sheet here, you'll see that it actually comes up as an updated item in that Excel sheet. I haven't had to download an Excel, use OpenXML, add the row, then upload that Excel document back up into OneDrive for Business. That's all just been done by one REST API call. And the nice part is essentially that works in a co-authoring situation as well. So I can be editing this in Excel Online, and at the same time, that service can be injecting those rows as well. Absolutely. So it's really nice from a back-end services way of being able to update those Excel spreadsheets. And you can delete rows, you can edit rows in there as well. So for companies that live and breathe in Excel, which is a lot of organizations in the world, you now have the ability to programmatically, using those Excel REST APIs, kind of connect in and update that data, which is really neat. Now, in addition to that, one of the other good things, if I jump back to this machine, is inside of PowerPoint, we've built an example where I can go and connect to the Excel REST APIs and get the charts that live inside of those. So for instance, you can see here that I can see that Woodgrove Bank expense Excel file that's living in my OneDrive for Business. And when I click and launch into that, it's going to use the Excel REST APIs to go find any charts in any of the sheets that live inside that spreadsheet document. And for instance, if you remember that initial chart that got created that was based on all the transactions over time, I now can insert that directly in there. So this is like a combination of not just the fact that I'm using Excel REST APIs to get at the charts that are inside a spreadsheet that's hosted in OneDrive for Business, but also the fact that I can use that API within an Office add-in and then inject those charts directly into my PowerPoint slide here. Or this could be in Word, and I could be injecting them in Word too. So one nice thing that we did here from an authentication perspective is we have this new layer of code inside of my add-in screen, which is called the display dialog. Now, one of the big bits of feedback we had from partners and from people in the enterprise building for their own internal employees was when we do want to reach out to a service, whether it's the Microsoft Graph, whether it's Salesforce or what have you, they were hand-rolling how we did this authentication because we had to have a pop-up to make me log into that service. Now with this display dialog async command inside Office.js framework, we have the ability to handle that pop-up of authentication in a lot more standardized and clean way. And then what that pop-up does is hand that token back to my client that then can call inside of the iframe of the task pane and call using that token and get that service information back. So these samples will all be available so you can dig into exactly how that's happening under the hood. But this is a really cool additional thing we've added because we just realized this scenario of a lot of Office add-ins want to connect to that data in that way. Now, there is an even better, cooler example here where you're going to be even more generous with,
Yes.
with your scenario. So I'm going to flip over to your machine, Tristan.
So what I'm going to show you really quick is that Excel REST API. We think this is an amazing piece of our overall Microsoft Graph story, right? Because one of the most valuable assets that Office generates is all the content, right? Whether it's documents or spreadsheets or presentations. And formerly, those had been kind of a black box, right? You can get to the file, but if you want to dig into the file, like Jeremy said, you have to download it. You have to use client tools or the OpenXML SDK or something to parse them. And now you've got just some really simple standards-based REST calls that let you get in there, interrogate the content, change it at will, and do all kinds of fun things. So one really cool partner who's been working with us as we've built this out is Zapier.com. Are folks here familiar with Zapier? So it's sort of a if this happens, then do that sort of solution. And they've built an Excel channel that'll take advantage of the Excel REST APIs and let you build really interesting workflows. So I'm going to demo one really quick. So I've got PayPal here. Imagine I'm a small business, and I'm out there selling candy all day. And at the end of the day, I'd love to have an Excel spreadsheet that says, what were my sales like? Because Excel's kind of the small business tool for analytics, for when am I getting my sales? Who's my best salesperson? That sort of thing. So I'm going to use PayPal here. I'm going to charge myself $18. I bought a lot of candy, apparently. So let's just go and make that charge. If anyone tries to read the credit card number, unfortunately, it's a prepaid gift card, so you won't get anything out of it. But so I'm going to go and finish that. I'm going to go and say, hey, OK, Tristan, thanks for your candy order. Let me charge that out really quick. And what's going to happen is now PayPal actually has a Zap set up that is going to use a webhook to take that successful sale and push it back over. So if I jump over to my PC, now the payment's complete. What you're going to see over here on the left is that I've set up a Zap that says, hey, on every successful sale in PayPal, go get that data from that incoming webhook, and then insert a row in Excel. And right there you saw in real time, while I'm editing that spreadsheet, so that guy's opening Excel online, as soon as that successful sale went through PayPal systems, a new row showed up in my Excel spreadsheet, and the chart updated automatically. So now as a small business, with just a couple clicks in Zapier, I can set up connections to all of my other data sources and have that data reflected in the tool that I already use to do all of my analytics, which we think is super awesome.
Now, and there's plenty of different Zaps that you can connect to in Zapier. There's some scenarios, like I might have all the home automation where when I leave and come back to the house, my locks on my doors, I could actually have a geeky log in Excel of when people are coming and going in Excel and have charts and sit down with my family and discuss how long people are at home and whatnot. But we thought the PayPal one was pretty exciting there. But it just shows you that capability that Excel REST APIs gives you, not only directly through REST, but with other services like Zapier that can connect into these REST APIs. But do you want to show some of the other capabilities that Microsoft Graph can do inside the Graph Explorer?
Absolutely. So there's a session this afternoon on Microsoft Graph, and one of my colleagues, Garrett's going to go into a ton of detail about a bunch of the amazing capabilities we've added into Graph since it became generally available last year. But I want to show one that really illustrates both how, with some simple REST calls, you can do some incredibly powerful stuff with the data that we store in Office 365. So let's do that. Let's jump over to graph.microsoft.com. which if you saw this morning, again, it's our great documentation site. All that documentation's on GitHub. Please get involved. But I'm going to use the Graph Explorer, which is just a visualization of those REST calls and JSON responses, to find a file in my OneDrive, check the permissions, and then update them. So you can imagine if you're building a third-party app that stores its files on OneDrive, setting permissions and making sure folks have access to that data is a critical part of your workflow. So let's see how simple it is to make that happen. I'm going to start here. I'm going to say, hey, using the Drive API, go find book.xlsx, and you can see what comes back is a simple JSON response that tells me about this file called book.xlsx that's up there in my OneDrive. Now, what are the permissions on that guy? So just by adding the permissions call on top of that file, I can, again, with one single simple REST call, see that, oh, here are the permissions I've got today. Great. You could check those in code. You could use the IDs to find out who has access to that file. Let's say that I found out, oh, I need to add permissions for my boss, right? This is super important for my boss to see, so let's have the code updated accordingly. So I'm going to create a post request. I'm going to call the invite API. So let's just switch over to invite. And I'm going to grab some super simple JSON that describes how I'll set up that invite. So here's that JSON. Let's jump back over. Paste it in, take a look at it. So in this case, I want the recipient of this invite to be my boss, Brian. The message is, here's that blog post you've been waiting for. He's been waiting for a blog post, so I'm going to deliver it to him in Excel format, oddly enough. And I'm going to require him to sign in to see it, and he's only going to be able to read. So now, just by making that single post request to Microsoft Graph, what we're going to see is the Graph's going to respond. It's going to say, hey, I created a new permission. So here's the Microsoft Graph permission for Brian, and here's the ID of the permission that I granted him. And now what I've done is in 2 REST calls, I've been able to check the permissions on any file in my OneDrive, add a new person versus via the invite API, and then if I were to jump back to the permissions API, you'll see that I now have an additional permission on that file that's given Brian access to that spreadsheet so he can go check out my blog post written in Excel.
So there's been a bunch of activity around this, and Yinna and Gareth will go into a lot more detail in their session later this afternoon. But just to give you an idea, the Excel REST APIs is something that we see a lot of opportunity inside there. And we've obviously increased on a bunch of other things that we haven't got time to go in. The OneDrive permissions is definitely one where we're seeing a lot more work. We do, as of today, are announcing the .NET SDK and an iOS and Android ones in there as well. And there are some other platforms coming in the coming months. So the people outside of kind of the Microsoft sphere on web platforms will be able to access the Microsoft Graph via an SDK. But for now, they can also just do it as direct REST calls. As you've seen in the Graph Explorer, it's very, very simple REST kind of syntax to go and get that information and those APIs around. So that's B820, which is Build Smarter Apps by Connecting to Office Services. That's at 2 p.m. So grab some lunch after this session, stay in this hotel, and just go straight to back to this room to see these guys go.
Tons of cool stuff.
Now, there are a ton of challenges, coding challenges on here, which you can go and try, kind of hands-on labs. So I'd encourage you just to go sit down in that lab room and just type in OFF, and you'll get the list of those challenges that are available to you there. A lot of what we've demoed today, but also some cool ones like being able to build inside a Windows UWP app and connect to the Microsoft Graph as well. So the last pillar to kind of wrap up this session is really about engaging users through conversations. And the 2 real buckets we have here is this notion of an Office 365 group connector and the Skype for Business web and mobile SDKs. And so from a connector perspective, if we just kind of address it here, we're really focused on this notion of I'm inside an Office 365 group, and what we mean by a group really is it's a group site. We're not talking about just Azure Active Directory security. We're talking about this notion of a group gets a bunch of things. So if I go over to my web page here, you'll see that every single group has a conversations where I can go and start conversations in here, and anyone in that group will actually get the ability to be notified of those conversations that are happening, and they can contribute and comment on those things on the mobile applications that are available, but also via email if they set up the be notified via email. So I can kind of go in here and start a conversation and in fun of hello world, so forth. But as well as having this conversations notion and this notions of members at the top here, I also have a calendar, which is essentially a calendar that's hosted in Exchange. So all the fruit and whistles that you get in your normal calendar next to your inbox, you get from a group perspective. I have this notion of OneDrive files in here as well, where I can go through and look at all those files. But I also have a OneNote notebook, and then this is a new addition, which is these connectors. And this notion is that once a connector is set up, they can actually post into that conversation thread. So as an example here, I can go through and pick to connect up to any one of these connectors, and I'm actually going to pick Wunderlist here. And when I click Add here, I'm already registered with Wunderlist with my account within my organization. And at the bottom, what you can see here is I can provide when I want to be notified. So I can start saying that I want to hear any time a task is created, when it's been reassigned, when it's been commented on, and when it's completed. And I'm going to drop it into, it's to do with your Wunderlist work calendar. So when I click Save here, that's going to go and create that connector. And you'll see when I close this connector window, if I go over to Conversations, that now it's telling me that the Wunderlist connector is connected to this particular group. Then a neat thing about this is when I go over to Wunderlist here and I go practice, 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 and click OK, when we come back over into here, what you'll see in the notification screen at the top is that you'll get a notification where a webhook has been called by the Wunderlist service that notifies this build group that essentially there's been a new task created. And obviously on stage, when everyone's watching, it's taking a little bit longer than it should do.
One of the things you will have noticed as this guy's loading, I really want to call it out, is we've got a ton of connectors that we've already released as part of the O365 connector infrastructure, and there's just a bunch of really cool stuff you can do. Like our team uses a bunch of different connectors every day. We connect to Stack Overflow, so every time you guys ask a question with the Office.js hashtag or the O365 APIs hashtag, that's automatically populated into a group for us to talk about and figure out how we're going to answer you. Every time a build succeeds in VSO, we know that's automatically happened inside of that group, and it really enables us to centrally work inside of these Outlook groups and have all the relevant information from everywhere else in our organization pushed right there where we're already having that discussion, where we're already living and having that conversation, which is really cool.
Okay. So that was my mistake. I actually did create it not in the inbox, but in the other group. And so you'll see there's new activity there, and what that's done is it's created a new card in my conversation. And when I select on here, it tells me that Jeremy added a task in the list work, not in inbox, like the first time I did that. And then when I click reply all, I can start a conversation here with the rest of the group around that particular card. And I can go through and pick whoever else other than the build people I want to collaborate with. So I could say this task is really urgent, and excuse me, I could say Chris Johnson, when is this going to be complete? And click send. And then everyone that's inside that Office 365 group, including the fact I've mentioned another user inside of this organization, will be notified that this task needs completing. And this discussion can go on inside that group. And it doesn't just have to be a task aspect. You can create your own connectors here that interact with this as well. So for instance, we have a lab downstairs in the coding challenges section where I can create my own connector with code. Now in this scenario, what I'm going to do is simulate this post to this particular webhook. So when I open up the connectors here, inside of here, you'll be able to create an incoming hook. So if I scroll down, you see there's plenty of connectors in here, and there's a one called the incoming webhook. And when I click add here, it gives me the ability for me to give this particular connector a name. I can even go as far as picking what image I want. And then when I click create, that's going to go away, and it's going to register this connector against this particular Office 365 group. Now, at the bottom of this is the really important part, which is the webhook URL. So if I just kind of go into Notepad quickly and have a look, there's a little bit of IDs and so forth going on in here. And that's a unique identifier that connector can be called from. Now, that's important because what I can do is I go over to a way that I can just simulate a post back in here. So I'm just using Hurlit in this instance, and you'll see Gareth in the API sessions later go into this in more detail. But I just changed that to post. Now in the lab, I've got some sample data here just to show you exactly what that's doing. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a header, and I'm going to declare that it's of content type, and we're going to use application.json. I am not a robot. I am a human being, as much as this whole conference has been about bots. I'm going to click Add Body here, and that's what I'm going to post into this group. So all I do now is using Hurlit is basically I'm going to execute that request inside this kind of framework. And then if I go back to my group, you'll see that response happened. And if I close, I just click Done down here, what you'll see in the conversations view, if I close this down, is that when I zoom in, there's actually new activity. So I can click here and click New Activity. And what you'll see here is that it's posted this card that says hello world, hello from Build 2016. Now, you can get a lot more creative than just hello world here. And as an example of that, if I jump back into this lab, if you follow the lab through, they give you a snippet that has a lot more JSON. I'll walk through this once we've pasted it in. I can come up here and paste that particular JSON packet in. Again, I'm not a robot. It really thinks I am a robot today, Tristan. And I click Launch Request. While it's doing that, I'll just show you what the code is structured like. Essentially, we've got this idea of a summary where it's a new comment by Ben Quillen, and he's a Fabricam forum. We're going to use a particular theme color in here for this JSON, and we're going to have a few facts where we're writing out, it's been added by Ben, this was the date, this is the priority, and this is the state. And then in the activity title, we're going to call it Ben Quillen commented, and we're going to have an image that we're going to show, which is a user image that's hosted somewhere in the web. Now, if I go back into my group, you'll see there's a new activity in this conversation. And now when I click on this one, you'll see the card looks very different to that hello world. And so you have the ability to customize these cards based on that JSON syntax. And for instance, you could go over here and click view details, would then launch you into whatever application your system is posting from. And as usual, we can go in here and start conversations around this activity. So if you're using Office 365 groups already, go check out those connectors. There's a ton of those already available out the box, including the Zendesk one that Yina demonstrated in the keynote. And it really gives you a lot of power in terms of how you can go and work with Office 365 groups in a way of keeping those conversations going where your users live, whether it's in the web browser with Office 365 groups or whether it's on the mobile applications. Now, to link them up a little bit more, Groups also has an API. So when we talk about the Microsoft Graph, you can actually go through and iterate through the members of your groups. You can go and get the conversations in your groups. You can go and add events to the calendars within your groups. You can go and create pages in your OneNote that's living in OneDrive for Business as well. So there's a lot of extensibility, not just with connectors with Office 365 groups, but also what is available on the Microsoft Graph as well. So if we just go back to slides. We've kind of covered all this. So the other one that we wanted to show was this notion of Skype. So Tristan, do you want to explain a little bit about Skype and how that kind of works with engaging users in conversation?
Absolutely. So hopefully everybody saw the keynote this morning and saw Yina's MD Live demo. We kind of want to build on that a little bit. So we've done some really awesome work in Skype as well for the Office platform. First thing we've done is we're announcing the release of the Skype for Business user API, which will give you access to the contacts and presence and conversations that are going on in Skype. So now I can go, all that rich conversation that's happening in Skype, that's all accessible through a standard REST API that I can go and pull that data and use it inside of my own applications. As well, what you'll notice with the Skype API when you start playing with it is it uses Azure Active Directory for authentication. So the same way that you register all the other apps we've shown against Microsoft Graph, you'll be able to use with User API. It's a familiar authorization model. It's using the same scopes model that you saw for that other set of Graph demos. And in future, it'll be very tightly integrated with all the other APIs that we're shipping across Office. As well, we've got two other things that we're showing, which is the Skype Web SDK, which is essentially a JavaScript wrapper that lives on top of that user API and gives me access to all of that data through my own web apps, as well as using the native audio-video capabilities in the browser to give me access to the super powerful audio-video engine that is Skype inside of my own web applications. And finally, we're announcing the Skype for Business app SDK in preview, which is essentially a iOS or Android SDK that lets you take all that same capability in the web SDK and use it inside a native app. So whether that's an Android app or an iPhone app, you can go and grab it and use the full power of Skype inside of your own experiences. And to show you, you kind of saw the MD Live demo with Yina this morning, but we're going to start and show you a little bit of code. Jump to 6. So I have my Xcode project here that is my Skype demo. And I want to show you just really how simple it is to use the Skype app SDK inside of your own app to use all this cool stuff. So you can see that I've got the app SDK, so I've added it to my project. And then initializing it is as simple as a couple lines of code, right? It's incredibly trivial to say, hey, now that I've got this app SDK, how do I get it initialized? I just throw in a couple lines of code. And then further down here in the View Video controller, all I'm doing is I'm feeding it the Skype meeting URL for the meeting that I want it to connect to, and maybe a meeting display name, so what's the user's name as they log into my application, and then say, join meeting. And then what happens behind the scenes is the app SDK uses the power of the Skype AV services, and it'll connect and show that user's data and use the Skype backend to allow a communication between your app and whoever's on the other end of the Skype call. We can show you a quick demo of how that works. So here's the Woodgrove Bank application that is that Xcode project. So let's say I want to log into my bank. I'm going to sign in.
Nice secure password.
It's a very secure password. Thankfully, Woodgrove Bank security is 2 factors, so we're good. So here's my bank accounts at Woodgrove Bank. I can go in, I can see the balances, and I'm like, well, that's weird. Somebody's pulling a lot of money out of my bank account. I want to talk to an agent to see what's going on. And when I tap that button, it's making that join meeting call, right? So it's pulling the meeting URL that I added inside of that really simple 4 lines of code, and it's going to go join the meeting. And really quickly, as the app SDK pulls up, there I am talking to the guy in the back, so I can say, hey, what's going on? Who's stealing money from my bank account? He can see my photo, and I can see his. And now we're using the power of Skype to have that rich audio-video conversation between me and my friend here at Woodgrove Bank. So really cool stuff. I'd encourage you to go out, grab the preview, see how simple it is, integrate in your own apps, and really use that power of conversations and the power of Skype to power all really cool integrations that you're going to go and build.
We'll have to get Patrick a tie next time so he looks more like a banker.
He doesn't look very dressed up for a bank employee, does he?
Not quite as official as the doctor in the keynote. So there's been a lot going on around both of these engaged users conversations, whether it's Skype or the connectors. And so it's really exciting to see that progressed. Now, in addition to all those 50 connectors, we've got a bunch of other partners that will be coming soon that will go into a lot more detail on these things. And as you saw from my Hurleit demo, it's very, very simple to get those connectors up and running. So start thinking about those scenarios internally within your organization that make sense to have those conversations engaged in the groups based on your own business systems that you have going. Now, there's a session at 3:30, which is B848, which we split based on Skype and connectors that will go into even more detail on how you can get executed on those things as well. So please, if you're interested in those areas, go along to those things. And then from a coding challenges perspective, we have a lab, which I showed a little bit of it from a preview, from a connectors perspective. And there are actually 2 labs for Skype for Business as well, which you can go and check out as well. And again, these labs are intended to be about 15 minutes. So they're very, very easy to get started and start to feel about what's going on. So for more information, you can go to dev.office.com or the graph.microsoft.io, as you saw inside of the keynote this morning. But I will just say that we have, just to point out a few areas, and Tristan kind of bridged a few of these. But on blogs.office.com this morning, we had a blog post that went out which kind of talks at the high level from Kurt Kay, who's my boss's boss's boss, explaining about some of the vision there, including some of the things that were shown yesterday around inking in Office, at the bottom of that blog post, and an Office on the HoloLens. So please give that blog post a read. And in addition to that, we've just updated the dev.office.com Dev Center with a bunch of new content, including videos that are about 7-8 minutes long that go into a lot more detail from the PMs themselves. And you will notice that a lot of the PMs are here this week actually at the booth. And a big thank you for those guys for coming. So kind of have a look at these videos. We go into a lot more detail about all those roadmap features we've talked about. And then in addition to that, we have a blog post that kind of goes into a lot more detail as well on exactly all those features as well. So just 2 blog posts and a bunch of videos will get you a lot up to speed other than those sessions that we're doing all through the Office Day today on a Thursday. Please come and see us at the booth, and please come and take those coding challenges. We do have some great swag there if you actually complete those labs, including some hoodies that are modeled by people as they're walking around this week. I hope to see you all in this upcoming sessions this afternoon.
Absolutely.
It's great to see a big crowd interested in Office development, and enjoy the rest of Build. And big thank you for Tristan for co-presenting with me.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks, guys.